Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has told the BBC he gets the frustration felt by the public over the pace of change since Labour's landslide general election victory more than a year ago. On the day MPs from all parties returned to Westminster after their summer recess, he said his priority was, in his words, delivery, delivery and delivery, and that his government was moving on to its second phase, having laid the foundations of what he wants to achieve. Well, he accused his political critics of thriving on grievance, singling out Nigel Farage's Reform UK as having no interest in solving problems. But pressed on immigration levels into the UK and the issue of hotels housing asylum seekers, he conceded he wouldn't want one in his own town or street and would like to close them sooner than the end of this parliamentary term. Have a listen.
I want to see every single asylum hotel closed. The way to do that is in an orderly way that actually gets the cases done. Not, and here's the big divide.
The is,
you put to me, Nigel Farage. The difference here is between an orderly, sensible way of actually fixing a problem we inherited from the Tories, or fanciful arrangements that are just not going to work. I mean, Nigel Farage and Reform are just the politics of grievance. They feed on grievance. They don't want the problem solved because they've got no reason to exist if the problems are solved. And so the contrast in politics is a Labour government rebuilding, renewing the country in the way that we said we would, or this politics of grievance that simply puts forward unworkable, fanciful ideas that are actually not fair to the public to put forward yet again ideas that just aren't going to work.
But let me take you to one of these towns where there is an asylum hotel. How would you feel if it was a hotel at the end of your road? If your daughter was having to walk past one of these hotels every day, how would that make you feel?
I completely get it. I mean, local people, by and large, do not want these hotels in their towns, in their place. And nor do I. I'm completely at one with them on that. I'm not in any way underestimating the strength of feeling that there is, because people strongly feel that these claims should be processed. People shouldn't be held at their expense.
They don't want that hotel at the end of the road. They're trying to live their lives. Their children, they're worried if their children are safe.
Well, look, I understand why people want the hotels closed. I want them closed. And I will work across the board to close them as quickly as possible. That is my aspiration. Every one of those hotels closed down as quickly as possible. Well, the way to do that is to work through the backlog.
But can you put a date on it?
Well, we've said we'll get rid of them all by the end of the Parliament.
That's that's 4 years away.
I'd like to bring that forward. I think it's a good challenge. I want to bring that forward. And part of the change in the phasing of government is to say what we need to do needs to go further and faster and be brought forward. But do I understand why people are concerned about asylum hotels? Absolutely, I do. Do I share their feeling that they should be closed as soon as possible? Yes, I do. But we've got to have a sensible way of actually doing that.
Well, that was just part of the interview. Ian Watson is our political correspondent at Westminster. Ian, you were listening to the whole thing. Bringing forward the target to close those asylum hotels is the headline. But was he any more exact about the timeline here, the exact timeline?
No, Matthew, he wasn't. And I think that's what's going to concern some Labour MPs of his own party, feeling the pressure from Reform UK. They're behind them in the polls. They accept the deadline of the end of this Parliament to exit asylum hotels. But what they're looking for are milestones, looking for the government to be able to say, for example, early next year, we will reduce the number of asylum hotels from currently more than 200 to a more specific figure. Because the government, as you know, their big message is now delivery. And I think what some of their own MPs want to see are milestones for that delivery, certainly when it comes to asylum hotels, so they can tell a sceptical electorate that they are actually making progress, to look out for that progress. And they've got an alternative to some of the much more sweeping and, if you like, much more simple solutions being put forward by some of their political opponents, including Reform UK, who talk about deportation, who talk about getting out of European and refugee conventions. If the government is going to say this will take time, step by step, as Keir Starmer said, then some of his own people say, OK, can you set those steps out more clearly for us? He didn't do so today.
We heard in that interview, he said he would definitely lead the Labour Party into the next general election. What did you make of that? And also the major shake-up in the way Downing Street is to operate?
Yeah, well, I think in fairness, Matthew would probably be leading all our bulletins if he'd said anything other than he was going to be leading the party into the next election. If he suggested perhaps that he was faltering in any way, his political opponents and some in his own party might pounce. So I think he'd no choice but to say that. But clearly he knows he's got his work cut out in order to stay in that position. And again, that message is about delivery. What we're seeing is a good minister in charge of knocking heads together to try to deliver on the government's priorities. But we're also seeing more honing of those priorities. There are 5 overarching missions of government which most people can't name. So today they're emphasising that where they want to see delivery is on 3 key issues. One is, of course, economic growth and living standards. Another is fixing the National Health Service. But interestingly, the third is securing our borders. They recognise the resonance that issue has at the moment, and that has become more resonant, in fact, over the summer.
And pulling it all together, Ian, in terms of an overhaul around communications, that is one thing, but it all boils down, doesn't it, to policy, to delivering on whatever the promises are, and these are going to be tough months going forward ahead of the budget.
They're going to be very tough months indeed, Matthew, and I think that's partly why there is a shake-up. But this is not the first shake-up, of course. His former Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, exited. There's previously been a shake-up in the communications team, and some people are saying, actually, is the problem the messengers or is the problem the message? But certainly there are people there who will be expected to communicate better what the government's priorities are going to be. But a big challenge is going to be the budget and the need to raise taxes and which taxes to raise, which taxes will have support from the wider public, which from Keir Starmer's own party. And he's now appointed a new economic advisor of his own, somebody who has a big background in economics and academia, who'd worked for the Bank of England, the International Monetary Fund, Baroness Shafik. So he is now effectively, I think, taking more advice independently of the Treasury ahead of that big political as well as economic event, which is this autumn's budget.